All right, so speaking of fairness, can I get a position on an issue that is, say, well to the right of center in a left of center newspaper such as the Toronto Star, and can I get a left-wing position in the National Post that is a slightly right of center paper? Will an editorial board have that open a mind?
I think an editorial board, certainly the boards that I have been connected with at the Toronto Star for that 9-year period, absolutely, because we like controversy. We like the world of ideas, we like shaking up people, and we respect the ability of the reader to make up his or her own minds. There may be papers that don't want any interference with the party line. Certainly my experience at the Toronto Star was not that. We encourage people of other points of views. I look at USA Today sometimes when I'm in the States, and it's really interesting how they run the pro on an editorial, and then they have another editorial, the con, which is a very interesting way of doing things.
Or even straight reporting. You can have one reporter report on one side, another reporter report on the other. That's kind of fun too.
This is kind of fun too. So expose your readers to all kinds of views and ideas, and you're a better publication. I remember one situation at the Star where the news side was pummeling a judge for a decision involving women and attitudes toward rape. And my gut feeling is that the judge, was being very unfairly pillared. And I persuaded our editorial board when we had our morning meeting to go to bat for the judge, even though we were going to bat against our newsroom and our coverage. And the editor said, fine, the head of the board, go ahead and do that.
Well, that's fun to hear, and if I can, and it's gratifying to hear, if I can share with you a story from an editorial meeting in radio. Someone was proposing a feature item on bats. There was a woman who collected bats or studied bats or had bats in cages in her home, and someone in the editorial meeting said, what about the balance? As if you would have to interview someone who didn't like bats. Not every story does need both sides told, right?
Exactly. I think that's taking balance to an extreme.
My fault. I have talked about 3 and 4 things all at once, so let's now separate the op-ed page,
right,
which I believe has a separate editor, from the editorial board, which writes the editorials on the editorial page. Is that correct?
During the time I was at the Star, the head of the editorial board had responsibility for the op-ed page as well.
Is that normal?
I don't know about practices in other papers, but that was the way it was at the Toronto Star.
Okay, so let's take each page in turn, both pages in turn. If I want to write over my signature, my byline as Joe Citizen, member of the NGO, member of the government, member of the political party, something on the op-ed piece, how do I make that pitch? As opposed to a feature or insight or the weekend or whatever, does the op-ed page have a special pitch it needs?
I think the best way is to contact the person who has the responsibility of placing the articles on the op-ed page. For example, if you look at the editorial board of the Toronto Star today, I think it's probably Bob Hepburn. I'd call up Bob Hepburn and say, look, here I am. This is what I would like to write for you. This is essentially what I can do and what my views are. Will you give me the space? And he'll probably say, sure, but let me see what you are doing. Let me see the piece. And if you satisfy me that it's relevant and well written, we'll run it.
Now, there are those who say, and I'm sure it differs by person, but those who say, well, write a more formal query letter saying, here's who I am, these are my bona fides, this is why. There are others who say, write the whole thing and show them a draft.
I believe in that latter approach. Write it. Otherwise, you got to bother them twice, Allan. Show them what you can do. Here it is, or here is 90% of it. Here's what I'm going to say in the strongest terms. And here is why it's relevant. Take it or leave it.
I make a quip with my clients, if you can't boil your position down into a 750-word op-ed piece, you may not have a very clear position.
I think that is relevant. If it's clear in your mind, you should be able to work within that 750-word limit, which is par for most of the op-ed pieces at the Toronto Star. The other thing I think you might also notify the paper is that you are only offering this to the Toronto Star. A feeling of exclusivity. And you might say, I've come to the Star because I feel that the Star will give this the best treatment and have the best audience to entertain these ideas.
Now, half of what that column's called has the word, or the allusion to the word opinion in it. But what about facts? What about academic citations, statistics, OECD studies, StatsCan, this type of thing?
I think that an op-ed piece has to be beautifully written, has to grab the reader from beginning to end. And I think we all know from our university days that when you just load an article with footnotes and academic citations, it's boring and it puts people off, and it's not the stuff of great journalism by any means. So I think a good op-ed piece has to be something that you read very easily, that a knife could slice through butter, it goes so smoothly, that makes the points very, very well, and that's interesting.
And what about, might even be the straw person or a straw opponent, but what about attacking a columnist in the paper or a previous op-ed piece or an editorial position? Does that controversy grab?
I've never believed in that approach to journalism. I believe that it's very important to acknowledge the opposing positions, Alan, to let the reader know here's what other people are arguing with respect to them. But for the following reasons, this is why I maintain that here's the way things should be.